All right, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, Her Excellency Ambassador Liubov Abravitova, Ambassador of will also address us tonight, today, this afternoon. And also thank you once again for gracing us with your presence. We look forward to your words today. Thank you. All colleagues and members of the diplomatic corps of the Embassy of Ukraine, South Africa, welcome. Honorable Minister Yaroslav Spira, head of the Polish diplomatic mission, for your address today. Thank you again for gracing us with your presence. And all colleagues and members of the diplomatic corps of the Embassy of Ukraine in South Africa. Welcome to all directors, candidates, executive director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. Thank you for your presence and the address that you give us today. Mr. Stefan Zuzak, President of the Polish Association of Siberian Deportees in South Africa. We continue to have and enjoy a wonderful relationship and partnership with this annual event, and we hope that this will continue for many years. So thank you. Professors, academic heads of departments and business practitioners, welcome. Dr. Probus Radomir, Acting Dean of Humanities Department at the Salt Lake University, and we also look forward to your address that you give us today. Thank you. Dr. Wanda, Chunnett, business practitioner and entrepreneur, whose presentation titled Characteristics of Polish Refugee Entrepreneurs Who Established Sustainable Businesses in South Africa. So that promises to be enlightening and eye-opening. So look forward to that. And also Dr. Marta Nowakowska, assistant professor at the Department of Management at the Warsaw University of Science and Technology in Warsaw, in Poland. And your presentation today titled Managing Cultural Heritage, an Introduction to the Identity of Soviets or borderlanders of interwar Poland, also promises to be eye-opening and enlightening. Dr. Marta is joining us via Zoom, so we look forward to the presentation. All members of the Polish community in South Africa, welcome. Welcome to all survivors and descendants who are joining us today, colleagues, friends, and supporters. Welcome all to the Johannesburg. Thank you. And welcome to the special event, the 9th South Africa-Poland Heritage Conference. And this year's title is South Africa on the Edges of Polish Identity. This event is in partnership between the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center and the Polish Association of Siberian Deportees in South Africa. Thank you to the Embassy of Poland in South Africa, based in Pretoria, and the Embassy of Ukraine in South Africa, also based in Pretoria, for their support and participation. Of course, Poland and the Ukraine have a very long and interesting history as neighbors, and that is also what makes today's event very hard. So, and also as the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, we are honored to have had a wonderful relationship with the embassies of both these countries. So we hope that it will continue for many years to come. This event will include the opening of an exhibition called Mom, I Don't Want War. And I hope you have time to explore this exhibition after our presentations. This was created by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Poland, and also the Central Archives of Modern Records in Warsaw. And also they collaborated with the project Mom, I See War. And this is a special project that brought together over 10,000 children's drawings about war and peace in Ukraine. So please also take the time to explore that. At this point in time, it is my privilege to invite Director Tan Bates to address us.
All right, let's do it like that. sorry, hybrid events. We're doing it. And hello to everyone on Zoom. Hello to everyone here. It's wonderful that we are together in a hybrid event at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. Wonderful to work with the Embassy of Ukraine, with the Embassy of Poland again, and of course, with Siberian deportees of South Africa, and with the University of Salt Clyde in Kimberley. And there are 2 people waiting. If we can let them in, or shall I let them in? Let me do that. Sorry. So, multitasking. There are lots of things happening here. What is really important for us at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center is making connections between the past and the present. And I think that this exhibition and this conference that we do today is exactly about that. The exhibition is really looking at then, 1939 to 1945, through the eyes of children, and today, Ukraine under attack from Russia, and how children are experiencing war. In our permanent exhibition, we always say that children are the most vulnerable victims of genocide, of war, of mass atrocities, and the trauma lives on within them, not only now, but for years to come. And that is where our conference comes in today, because we look at identity, and we look at identity now, 80 years after those children were taken from Siberia to South Africa, to the Western Cape. What happens to that identity, even now that it's 3rd generation, 4th generation, and we have here and on Zoom many that are from that generation? That is the core of what we do here at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. We look at memory, we educate, we look at lessons for humanity from the past, but then we make connections to today. And it is a great honor to work with you, Ambassador of Ukraine, and to highlight, since the war started on the 24th of February, to highlight and to make sure that South Africans know, and they have information, they have the tools to be able to know what is going on so far away, and to make connections to our own struggles, to our own history, and then support as much as possible the war currently. Thank you very much for the partnership, Stefan. Thank you very much to all the people joining us on Zoom, to all the partners. It is my absolutely honor and pleasure to do this annual conference every November at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. Thank you.
Well, okay, I will also sit. That's fine. So thank you, Tali. Thank you, Director Nate, for that address. And so now, at this point, it is my privilege to invite Her Excellency Ambassador Liubov Abravitova to address us. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. First of all, of course, thank you for the hospitality, the usual hospitality to the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. Dear colleagues from the Polish Embassy, thank you for cooperation, solidarity. It's not only that solidarity that we feel back in Europe today during the war of Russia in Ukraine, but it's also very strong connection, attachment, and support here in South Africa, far away from home, from your side. I appreciate all the efforts. I appreciate that we are able to do this exhibition which is about the connection of not only influence of war on children, but also the connection, how the war in the past influenced children, and nothing changed today, how it's influencing our children, and not only in Ukraine today. I'm grateful to Stefan for his solidarity and also big hug of support. This is something that keeps us moving today and warming our hearts. We today speak about the connection that Tali just said between the past and present. And when I was thinking about what we should discuss today during this meeting, I could not escape the very memorable day that we were commemorating yesterday. So every last Saturday of November, every Ukrainian in his house at 4 o'clock is lighting the candle. And it's not random. We are remembering the victims of Great Famine of Holodomor, when millions of people were starving to death. And I would want to use this platform and this opportunity because in many countries, including Ukraine, and more other parliaments and governments are recognizing the Holodomor of 1932-1933 as a genocide of Ukrainian people. So I want us to remember that for 17 months at that time, 17 people, children and women and elder people and women and men, 17 per minute were dying because of the famine, because of the starving. That means that in one day, approximately 25,000 people were dying for 17 months. And that famine was artificial. It was imposed. It was made to Ukrainians because our desire to be not only independent, but to have a right for self-determination as Ukrainian people. And this brings me to the idea, to the thinking that we all are paying for our rights so important price. And after we pass through this, we say never again. I was walking around the exhibition today. I was looking at the memories of Rwanda genocide, of Herero, of what was happening during apartheid. And we say never again, and then we repeat the history itself. So maybe that is why it is important to look in the past again, like we do today with this exhibition, to educate the younger generations that we never repeat this again, never allow the future generations to go through what we are going today. I'm really grateful that this exhibition, which you are opening and welcoming today for the 9th South Africa World Heritage Conference, will make a difference for South Africans, for those people and children who will be coming to the center and will educate that this pain, and we did discuss it with the center about psychological impact of any conflict and war, that it will have its consequences for our children. That's why we have to educate in order to avoid the repeating. So never again. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and let us have a successful event. Let's see.
Thank you, Excellency. What's interesting about children is that children are 100% of the future. So whenever we discuss whatever is happening now and how it affects children, we always have to remember that that is 100% of the future. So what future are we actually creating? So we always have to remember that. So thank you for those words, Your Excellency. So at this point, it is now my privilege to invite Minister Jaroslav Spira to address us.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. In the beginning, I want to congratulate Mr. Tuli for his excellent spell of the Polish names. I was really impressed. And of course, I want to thank you to Director Tainantes for and all the staff of the Johannesburg Center for the excellent cooperation during the years. And essentially, I am very grateful to Liubov Abravitova for his presence, and of course for the cooperation of the embassy in Ukraine and the Ukrainian people in that kind of event, in that kind of exhibition, because the presence of Ukraine show the liaisons between our two nations. And of course, in this moment, I believe that present our solidarity to Ukraine is the obligation of every decent nation and every decent government. Because the Ukrainians, they are not fighting for this territory, they are fighting for the right to be an independent nation, for their culture, for the language, and for being considering like a state who has the right to decide what they want to do and what it be the future. In this moment, Ukraine represents the best of the humanity. They present the fighting for the freedom, for the democracy, and ready for the right of self-determination. So I salute the courage of the Ukrainian people. And of course, I salute the courage of the Ukrainian army, who has shown that he is really one of the best army in this moment. And I believe that one way or the other will continue to present our solidarity. We'll still help Ukraine until I believe a victorious end of the war for the Ukraine. And of course, Stefan, thanks to Stefan, we have the 9th conference of the Polish South African heritage. Every conference is interesting, every conference is new and has, of course, new elements, because the question of the heritage, the question of the participation of different parts of the nations in the creation of a new nation, it's always interesting. But it's always interesting to maintain it, to discuss about what is the future of the immigrants in a new environment. What is the question of maintain? Is possible maintain the language, or only the tradition, only the memory? It's the language necessary to maintain the tradition and the notion that's of the heritage. And of course, what is the contribution of every group to a new nation? So this is really interesting things, and I am very happy also to once again to participate, to have the cooperation of our Ukrainian friends, because of course the Ukrainian colony has also an interesting position here in South Africa. I believe that the Slavic colonies like Ukraine and Poland, they have made an interesting contribution. And I believe that this conference will show, or at least it will be a contribution to that kind of discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Stira. Thank you for your compliments. It is very, really out of respect to try and learn to pronounce people's names properly, because just very disrespectful. But thank you very much for your words, and thank you for your continuous cooperation and work with us. Thank you. So now it is my pleasure to invite someone who really has worked very, very hard in every year to put this conference together. So my friend, our friend, Stefan Zugzak.
I love it. Okay. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Minister. And I'm going to make my speech a little bit longer because of your referencing the Holodomor. My father's hometown, Chunnett, straddled the river's Bruch. In the interwar period, my father was on the western side of Bruch. And when I first visited my father's older brother in the UK, he made mention of how during the Holodomor, the Poles, or rather the people, I think, on the Polish side of Warsaw, including the Shaftruk family, would, in the still of the night, cross the river to feed the Shaftruk family, who were also persecuted in the Holodomor. I'm going to say it is as it is. My uncle even described the cannibalism for people to survive. So, yeah, my family suffered the Holodomor. Okay. All right. Okay. Now to get to what I was wanting to chat. Now, I'm glad that this presentation of the children's paintings is on display. I don't know if there's an electronic version that possibly could be put online. I don't know, it would be brilliant. But anyway, just note that there's one blank poster. And I just want to mention what's written at the bottom of that poster. It should represent the drawings of Polish children showing Russian crimes committed in Poland since September the 17th, 1939, the day of the Soviet invasion of Poland. However, due to the decades-long Russian grip on Poland after the Second World War, even the most vaguest allusions to Russian atrocities were severely punished. Thus, such works, even if created, never saw public display. However, now after escaping Siberia and on reaching freedom in Persia, Polish children wrote on the experiences of Russian captivity. These essays are archived in the Hoover Institute in Stanford University in San Francisco. Now, Irena Grudzinska-Grosz and Jan Thomas Grosz reviewed these essays and published their findings. Common threads running through are, firstly, the brutal, oppressive nature of the occupation of the Kresy by Russian soldiers. Secondly, children report a mixture of awe and resentment by the Russian soldiers upon encountering a land of relative material and cultural advancement and sophistication. And then the common thread focuses upon the abrupt, brutal, and terrifying ordeal of the deportations and resettlement into Siberia. The writers provide horrific descriptions of the incredible suffering and deprivation they faced. These horrific conditions endured were compounded by the open ethnic bias displayed towards the Poles by their Russian captors. Now, I followed the Russian-Ukrainian conflict very carefully. And on following this conflict, it is obvious to see Stalin's ruthless and cruel game plan on the Polish children is being copied by Stalin's spawn, Putin, in his ruthless and cruel game plan on Ukrainian children. The similarities are striking in terms of what the Polish children wrote and what has been reported. Stalin stole the childhood of Polish children. Putin is now stealing the childhood of Ukrainian children. This is a book written by a Polish priest with Nowakowska, and an aptly titled book, Stolen Childhood, a saga of Polish war children. Now, with Stalin having forcibly uprooted and displaced millions of Poles, and Putin now forcibly uprooting and displacing millions of Ukrainians, perhaps an emerging uniting theme, we get ambassador to this, is this re-establishment of identities in new countries at least. Perhaps a common Polish-Ukrainian identity is emerging, that if we study further, and perhaps today's conference will lay the foundation for such a dialogue. Okay, I'm going to end off on a maybe slightly light-hearted note. My father, he would often talk about his experiences in Siberia. And one of his, he would often describe how he befriended a Ukrainian girl. Now, my father family and his family, they were deported far, Lake Baikal area. And he would often talk with fond memories about this Ukrainian girl. I'm convinced he had a crush on her. So who knows? Things have been different, maybe I would have had a Ukrainian lover. But anyway, I'll not forget that. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you. We look forward to the next conference next year. And I think, let's see, hopefully there'll be, this hybrid program really works often, so because it's very inclusive. So thank you for that. So now it is my pleasure to invite virtually Dr. Corvus Radomir, who is the acting Dean of Humanities at the Solpaki University. So my colleagues will zoom in.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to find out whether I'm audible and visible. I see myself, so I take it I'm visible. Can you all hear me on that side?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Oh, the mic. So can you try again?
Yeah, good afternoon. Can you hear me now? Right, good afternoon, everybody. And yes, warm greetings from Kimberley. Warm in the sense of from the bottom of my heart, because I am not very happy about the fact that I cannot be where you are this afternoon, but also warm greetings in the sense that it is Kimberley's summer is quite hot. But in observing all protocol, I just wanted to also greet the ambassador, Excellency, the ambassadors, and the minister, and then also to the director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, Charlie. We haven't seen one another for a while, but as I said, I'm envious for the fact that I cannot be there. And my task this afternoon is just to give, like it has been with every conference we have every year, just to give a little bit of feedback on the project itself. And we keep on saying that the project every year, Stefan and I have been joking that the conference has been exploding or expanding every year. So just as background to that, initially it was Stefan and Marta and myself who started with the project in 2013, and we have now grown to 7 members of the project team in 2023. So you can see by only looking at the number of people working on the project that there's been quite big expansion as well. So we have at this stage the two Stefans, Stefan S and Stefan H, just to differentiate between the two of them. And Marta, as like I said, was one of the initial members. She's still with us. Tatiana has joined, Veronica has joined, Michael is now part, Michael Rozansky is part of the group, and then myself. So that is just as an example to show you in the last 9 years how big this project has grown, that we needed to expand on the project group, and I'm sure that we will keep expanding in the next couple of years as well. So in reflecting back on 2022, as I said, every single year we, in having this discussion at each of the conferences, we jokingly say, and not always just jokingly, but literally, the project just keeps expanding. And we've just been saying that every year, but for this year, it is nice to give you all a bit of more evidence of how it is expanding. So a couple of things have happened during 2022 that has really involved, to a very big extent, all 7 members of the project group. So one of the things that we have done is we've changed the name of the project. Initially, it was known as the South Africa-Poland History Project. And during the course of the year, with many discussions that took place between project members and with people from outside, we decided to change it to the South Africa-Poland Heritage Project. And the main reason for that is, as we have been expanding on the project, the scope of the project, of what has been looked at has just kept on getting broader and broader. And as this project is registered as a research project at Salt University, I had to go to the research office at Salt University to change the name officially for the project. And I was literally with the director of research for a couple of minutes, and she said she fully understands why we want to change the name, because of the expansion of the scope of the project. Then, as most of you would know, a project that is aimed at being completed before September 2023 is the memorial or the monument at the Siberian Museum, which is after the project that was undertaken at the chapel for the lovely work that Stefan and Michael was doing on the windows. We are now looking at the memorial that will be erected, and Tatiana and her team is doing a really good job on that. And I have not seen Stefan many times this year, but when I did see him a couple of weeks ago, he was giving me feedback on the project as well. And we're all very excited to see what the team, Tatiana and her team, is developing, and as the end result, what we will see in September 2023. Then the third planning that has gone on this year is a narrative book on the Polish history and the Polish heritage in South Africa. And in many email responses and email correspondence from Veronica, as the member of the project group that's involved in that, or that's managing that, there is a couple of very exciting ideas that's coming to the fore, and there will be more details on that in 2023. Then in the fourth place, there's a coffee table book on the history of Poles in South Africa that Marta initiated. And in the brief discussion Stefan and I had about this as well a couple of weeks ago, as I said, it is very clear to see that I think what we are planning, and under Marta's management in this, will basically be a volume 1, because I don't think for something like a coffee table book we will ever be able to do everything in one book. So it is an exciting project with the first volume hopefully starting to develop very soon. And as I said, I'm sure that there will be a couple of more volumes on that going forward. Then in the fifth place, and I don't want to say too much on this because I know Marta will be in her presentation. Marta will be talking about this as well. The project group is looking at the development of a manual to promote Polish identity, culture, and heritage among the Siberaci and their descendants. And Marta will be in South Africa in February next year. But as I said, it's not something that I don't want to expand on now because it's the brainchild of Marta, and she will speak to that a bit later this afternoon. And in the sixth place, and as I said, in the past, we just kept on saying that the project is expanding. But the sixth thing that actually happened this year is at the 4th International Congress of Polish History that takes place every 5 years for the last 20 years in Krakow. Stefan S. was representing the group there, and from the feedback that I received, it was very well received, and there's a lot of inquiries that it has come to the fore on that as well. So I am very happy to say that not only did Stefan attend a very successful conference in Krakow in October, but it's also the second time in the last 5 years that one of the project members have been representing the project at this conference. And in discussions with Stefan, you will also hear from him that there is quite a lot of historians working on Polish history that did attend this conference. And then in the seventh project, that is an ongoing project, but that is always in the back of one's mind, is through all of this, everything that I've mentioned that has been happening during 2023. Stefan has been busy with his PhD, and through working on his PhD, he's also become involved in many new expansions on this project, and that's why I think it was important that his project, his PhD itself, which is basically part of the nucleus of the project, is very important to the group. So, Stefan, I would also like to use this platform to wish you well in that process. And I know that you have many irons in the fire, so doing this on top of everything else is really admirable. Thank you very much for that. So lastly, before I have just a short word for the of thanks for people that has been assisting us during 2022. You will note from what I've mentioned of what is happening or what did happen in 2022, there's one name missing from the project group that has not really been doing much this year, and that is my name. And I do want to sincerely apologize, given the fact that I relatively unwillingly was put in a situation at work that I needed to act in a position that was taking up quite a lot of my time. I was very inactive this year on the project itself, but I can say that at this stage, luckily my acting position is coming to an end March or April next year, and I have been granted sabbatical from June next year for a year. And at this stage, it is about 95% certain that for 3 months of my sabbatical, 3 or 4 months from September to either the middle or the end of December next year, I will be in Poland as a research fellow at a university in Poznan. So I will, through that, most definitely be back and make up for the time that I did not spend with the project team this year. And colleagues on that project team, I do sincerely apologize for that. And then lastly, in looking back at reflecting on 2022, I just want to, for all the support, Ali, that you and your team at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center has given us through this year and through the last couple of years. Thank you very much for that. And then even more so, a great word of thanks for the massive support to the Ambassador of Poland in South Africa and the Polish Embassy for the support that we as a project group have been receiving. It is really much appreciated, and we are looking forward to even making stronger the partnerships going forward and ensuring that we keep on expanding this project. And then very briefly, in looking at 2023, as mentioned already, the planning that is underway for the narrative and the coffee table book and the manual. And there's also a lot of excitement towards the 80th anniversary of the children of Oudtshoorn next year. And as part of the celebrations in September and the commemoration, it's the unveiling of the memorial or the monument at the CP Nel Museum commemorating the children of Oudtshoorn. And then also next year, we are looking forward to the 10th South African Poland Heritage Conference. It feels like the other day that we had the first one, but in 2023, we are also looking forward in having our 10th conference, and I'm sure we will make it something special, and I'm really hoping to be there next year. But as I said, chances are very big at this stage that I will be in Poland. So it is difficult to decide where I actually want to be at that stage, but I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you very much.
We can't hear you.
There we go. Okay, thank you. I was saying thank you, Dr. Madamir. I know the position of the department is very, very demanding and very challenging. So thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today. And hopefully maybe next year you will be here with us physically, and we'll add the title of doctor next to Stefan's name by next year. So hopefully, we hope so. Thank you. So at the beginning of my presentation, my introduction, I did mention that we will have two big presentations today. So the first presentation I would like to invite is by Dr. Wanda Chunnett, and she's titled her presentation, Characteristics of Polish Refugee Entrepreneurs Who Established Sustainable Businesses in South Africa. And as she delivers her presentation to us, please start thinking of questions. Later on, towards the end of our conference, I will open the space for questions and comments to our speakers and our presenters. So it is my pleasure to invite Dr. Chunnett.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm a bit concerned about big presentations. The other thing I would like to say is when Stefan suggested that I speak, I was wondering, is it really relevant to a historically focused piece of work that is being done here? But as I've heard more and more about the threads of what people are saying about how people establish themselves in the new country, how they retain their culture and their roots, what makes them successful, what gives them a contribution, I realized that actually the research that I was doing is as relevant today about groups that are currently on the move as what it was to the Siberian or the Siberians who moved over and settled in South Africa in the 1940s. So what we did is I was looking at what can emerging markets do, particularly in developing countries, to try and leverage the contribution that, and I call them constrained involuntary migrants, because it's such an emotive term to start using refugee and all sorts of terminology like that. But I was talking about people who don't voluntarily move to a country, people who move with either a machete in their back or have no choice whatsoever and land up in a place through lack of any other alternatives. What enables those people to actually make a contribution? And it was a longitudinal study. So I think the first thing I'd like to make is, while I'm going to talk about what the Poles did, it's not a Polish thing. The characteristics that these groups had, I studied Chinese migrants who moved to South Africa at the end of the 19th century. I studied the Polish group that came in the middle of the 20th century. And the last group, as Tali knows, because she helped me, was the Rwandans who escaped the genocide in 1994. And what these groups did and how they established themselves in not a socially inclusive society. South Africa has never had a strong social network. There are no support groups. You basically come here and you make it on your own. And I think there it is very different to a lot of developed countries where there are strong social networks. So I was trying to find out what makes some people victims, but more importantly, what makes other people successful and contributors. So what are these entrepreneurs? So first of all, the important point is they are a subset of migrants. Not every migrant who comes over the door is going to be a great creator of jobs. Some people are never going to settle. Some people have got huge longing to go straight home again. But there is a very important and significant part of those groups that actually go into a new country, establish themselves, and establish businesses. Important thing about them, and the big characteristic that I found, is that they are legacy forward, not back. Is that they are legacy driven. Every single one of the entrepreneurs that I spoke to was determined to leave some kind of legacy. They left things for their children. Their driver in creating the business was something that they could hand over to their children that they didn't have. And I think this is where they're different to people who went and got a job. People who got a job, there's nothing wrong with them. But the entrepreneurs were very, very determined that they were going to leave something for their children so that their children did not have to inherit the problems that they did. And there were sometimes that legacy drive was actually a very dominant and overpowering characteristic. I remember speaking to one woman who ran a game lodge up in Zimbabwe. At the time it was Rhodesia. And she says, sometimes I'm ruthless. I find that it brings out the Siberian in me. Because there is that deep-seated fight for survival that just never, ever goes away. The other thing that is interesting is that for most of the Poles that I spoke to and the other groups, they actually did not have the driving longing to go and resettle back in Poland. They had the initial trauma. Many of them went back to travel, to visit, to have family. But there was not the strong desire to ever go and settle back in Poland or to go and live in Poland. And when I was speaking to them or their children, they often said to me, my father was a very patriotic South African. He identified strongly as a South African, and he saw himself as part of his community. So while they had cultural affinity and they had very strong bonds, they did not see themselves as temporarily displaced, which is quite remarkable if you think that these people were moved under extremely traumatic conditions. And you would have thought that there would be a strong inkling to actually go and settle back in their home country. Now, part of this might, of course, be due to the fact that the conditions in the home country for many, many years after the resettlement were not conducive to them going back. But that was a very strong characteristic that came out. And I remember another quote that was done by one of the New Zealand group in a video that I saw at the same time, where he said, "My heart is Polish, but my head is Kiwi." And I think that really sums up. There was a very strong driving logic to understand where they were and how they were going to make their life there. The other thing that was quite remarkable to me was how similar their development was. They all seemed to follow a series of steps that I will elaborate on just now, but almost without any exception in the establishment of their businesses. What was different was the kind of businesses they made. Depending on the level of education, you would get the establishment of a scale of business that was everything from a small general dealer type business to somebody who had qualified as an engineer or architect that would be starting his own practice, employing 40 or 50 people. And there was a whole scale between them. People established construction companies, people established manufacturers. There was a chap who made fiberglass ladders for the power industry in South Africa. And all of these they tended to build on the education that they had and the experience that they had. And in this, they were actually quite different to many of the Rwandan refugees who were necessity entrepreneurs, who came out here, couldn't speak the language, didn't have an education, and literally had to scrabble at the back of a little shop to try and make ends meet and just keep food on the table for their families. So in that way, these Polish entrepreneurs were quite different. And the other thing that was very interesting is that once they're established, they require very little support from outside and from government institutions. They always viewed themselves as fiercely independent and not reliant on government institutions to actually help them. So the series that we spoke, how do they actually establish? They reach the host country. Okay. They then are either gain employment, as I said, based on skills, or else they establish these small little necessity businesses. Now, to scale up those necessity businesses is very difficult. But if they've got some education, they use that and they leverage on it and they establish themselves, and then they can create a business that could employ anything up to 40 or 50 people. Some of the businesses that I interviewed were in business still 50 or 60 years later, which is nothing short of remarkable if you look at the present economy and the economic circumstances. So what were these things, these defining things that actually got these people to where they were and established what I call their particular universal selling point, for want of a better word? The first thing is the fact that they had no choice in their destination. They didn't understand the language and they didn't have no local knowledge. Almost, well, in all exceptions. So this is where they're very different to migrants who choose to go and live in a country. I remember some of the Chinese people that I spoke to. They thought they were on ships to San Francisco, and then they were decamped in Port Elizabeth. They had no idea where they were going. And we know from the group that my father was part of, they were originally headed for Palestine. And it was pure coincidence that they landed up in South Africa. It's purely serendipitous. So the impact was that they didn't have a social circle when they got here. And what was the attributes that they developed in response? They were risk takers, far more of a risk taker than local populations. They prepared to they were prepared to work in many cases in the gray zone. Okay, it wasn't illegal, but it wasn't totally legal either. Okay, there was a lot of flexibility about how people were prepared to work. But that's typical of a risk-taking entrepreneur. They also were very charismatic. People would tell you that their father or their mother was a big party animal. The fact that they spoke with a really strong Polish accent did not stop them socializing and with local South Africans. Okay, they had strong charisma. So what was the next variable? The next variable was the group complexity of that migrant group. And this was interesting because to other people from the outside, it's the group, the Poles, the Ukrainians, the Rwandans. But internally, the dynamics were very complex. Just because they landed up on a ship with somebody else coming to a country did not necessarily mean that those were people they would have chosen to have come to that country with. It didn't mean that they were terribly culturally homogenous. And in fact, for many of the Cressy Siberians, it was geography that brought them here. They happened to come from the same part of a country, and that is why they were forced into a condition like this. What happened from that, and the characteristic of the entrepreneurs particularly, was what I called an ability to manage dichotomy. They could, it was almost to a point of schizophrenia, they could have two identities. They could have their business South African identity and their social Polish identity, where they could go home and be something culturally that they may not have been in the business world. And they were very comfortable to operate like that. So they didn't feel too constrained by the mores of their particular cultural society. They would go to church on a Sunday and speak to the church group on one way, and then they'd go on Monday and speak to a completely different group of people with a completely different mindset. And that dichotomy and that ability to gain social capital was extremely important for starting up businesses. So the next thing was the impact of discriminatory policies. What I found is that all governments everywhere discriminate against refugees. Some governments do it legislatively, some governments do it explicitly, and some governments do it implicitly. So for the Chinese, it was very obvious. They came into an apartheid South Africa, they were totally discriminated. They were not allowed to establish a business. It was illegal for them to even live in many parts of the country. So that was very overt. The Poles, in theory, didn't suffer from that, but that didn't mean that they were not discriminated against. There was definitely job favoritism. There was definitely language favoritism. They were not, they were, for the first couple of years that they were in South Africa, were kept very isolated from the local communities. So it wasn't an overt, brutal type of oppression, but there was definitely discrimination that occurred. So what happened is they got over it. Okay? The entrepreneurs did not let that become the overriding factor in their life. They retained their long-term vision and that legacy of what they were establishing here. And they often said to me, I wasn't establishing it, or my father wasn't establishing it for himself. He was establishing it for his family. So he was prepared to put up with a lot so that the family actually could take the benefit. And as I've said to you before, they also knew how to work the system. It did not take them long to figure out how to make things happen. They also learned very carefully to understand the feedback they were getting from within the group and how to filter that knowledge. Because the refugee group sometimes would give information that was not particularly accurate. So while a refugee would come into the country with a very implicit belief in what their home group was saying to it, the characteristic of the entrepreneurs is they got over it and learned to filter what was a credible source of information from what was just local gossip politics. The other thing that many people battled with was the recognition of their technical or business skills. So that meant they had to go out and get educated. In the case of the Poles, it was a case of trying to catch up on many years of schooling. They had to try and accelerate. They had to try and get themselves through technically qualified in a system where they didn't have a support group, they didn't have financial assistance. And this, in many cases, forced them, and it turned out to be a mixed blessing, to go and get sponsorship from companies. These companies, because the people were technically astute, would actually sponsor them, give them the employment, and that employment would be their springboard to later establishing a business, which was a very, in a way, it was tough, but it took time, but it was a good lesson for them in the long run. Leading on to that was their lack of access to formal funding. Where the Poles were quite different to the Chinese is the Chinese ran a stokvel. Okay, for those of us who do not understand Afrikaans, a stokvel is a stokvel. It's a cooperative where everybody contributes an amount every month, and it gets pooled, and somebody who requires capital can then draw on the pool in exchange for making contributions. And that is the way that many of the Chinese businesses established themselves. They couldn't go to the banks, nobody was going to give them money. So they worked a strong stokvel system. The Poles, I didn't find had a stokvel system. In fact, they said they got very little business financial support from within their own group for a number of reasons. Okay, some people told me it was a political thing. Some people told me nobody else had any money anywhere. So, you know, that was just what it was. So they went out, and that also tended to mean they took a little while before they established their businesses, because they had to build up their own capital before they could go out there and do that. And once they established it, to keep it sustainable, they used the family equity. They sweated the family. The children would tell you how they worked in that business week after week. Wives worked in it, husbands worked in it. It was almost without exception, every single business was a family business. And that was the key for them to keep costs down, to grow their business, and to turn it into an ongoing success. So we said, this is how it played out over a matter of time, okay? So they arrive, and it takes them about 10 years to actually establish themselves and get the kind of capital that they were looking for. And then they get their business skills. And then they can actually get consolidate and take that business over approximately 20 years, where they are actually consolidating, growing, turning it into a successful business. Now, the crux of my research was that if we can look at these people, their characteristics before the time, and catch them between the 20 and 30 years when they are coming into the market, and accelerate that, you are going to expand on those second and third phases, and could actually increase the job creation significantly by doing that. And where my research focused was, what can either governments or NGOs, NPOs, or the mixture of the government and NPOs actually do to identify those characteristics early on in these people coming into the system, and then actually accelerate the growth rather than waiting for the natural progression to happen. So I said, they've got all of this legal knowledge, language, economic, they build all of this stuff up, okay? And they build it, interestingly, because of the constraints that they've had. Okay, the very things that have constrained them, that limit them, enable them to actually build up these characteristics. And I lumped all of these characteristics together in a construct called migration capital. So you have migration capital because of where you've moved and how you've moved and the people you've met. It's something that your local entrepreneur does not have, simply because they have not had the life experiences that these migrants have had. And that it is a thing that should actually be, for want of a better word, exploited and explored by governments, rather than repressed and trying to force people into a mold where they can't actually benefit from doing that. So this is a bit more detail on it. So what I've said is you can, first step to doing it, what can we do about this? Well, the first thing is to try and change the narrative. The narrative of a refugee as burden is so strong, and it's going to take so long to actually change it, that really is the most powerful thing, the recognition that they're not burdens. Not all of them are burdens. But there are many organizations like UNHCR who make their money out of refugees. Okay? And it's actually quite astounding to see that the refugee as burden is an income source of billions of dollars to various organizations. So there is a very strong pull not to have a successful refugee, which sounds bizarre. You think it's completely counterintuitive, but from the research, that is a very strong, there's a very strong construct as far as that's concerned. So by changing the paradigm, and I think in a way, perhaps African countries do it unconsciously because we have no social networks. So people are not supported when they come in there. They are not the healthcare systems, the unemployment systems. It's fairly brutal, but it does actually select very quickly for people who are going to stand on their own 2 feet and make a contribution. The other people, it's not so nice, but for those entrepreneurs, it actually selects quite aggressively for those characteristics. I spoke about the donor views. I spoke about political exclusionism that happens. Therefore, I'm saying that government institutions and academic institutions actually have to cooperate. That really is the only way this is going to be resolved. It's not a policy-only thing. It actually requires cooperative institutions and cooperative organizations. And then there's the social integration. That's practical things people can do. The legal status, the recognition of skills that people have. We have many refugees that still come into the country and do not have their skills recognized. And it's not just a South African thing. All over the world, people go in and you have doctors who are taxi cab drivers. You have research professors who are car guards. You have many cases like that. And a restrictive regulatory environment that actually stops people from operating. Now, this is not necessarily just a refugee. It's an anti-entrepreneurial atmosphere. It's incredibly difficult to establish a business in South Africa, even a small business. The amount of red tape that you have to go through to establish a business is extreme. And if you can't speak the language and you're trying to establish that business, it's a very powerful barrier to entry. So the other thing that could happen, and I think people like Tully do a fantastic job with this, is providing people with accurate information. As I said, when people arrive, they don't understand what is noise in the system, what is myth about the system, what is real. You hear all sorts of rumors that people tell them this, don't go here, or these people will do this. And it is very difficult for many refugees to actually gain access to reliable and credible information that they can trust. And potential migrant entrepreneurs need to understand the language and cultural complexities, the specifics of geographic areas. What you tend to find is, and the Poles were no exception, they established smaller, less well-traded areas. They would establish their factories out in the mining areas where there wasn't much competition. And you still see it today with the establishment of Chinese and Pakistani industries in areas that you don't find South Africans operating in. And then, of course, there are the things about language classes, how to actually establish a business, getting over those migrant issues. And I think that really is somewhere that developing economies could make a very very much more significant contribution. As I said, they used to establish in undertraded areas. They used both creative and discovery opportunities. The creative opportunity is what I used to describe these really value-adding jobs, and a discovery opportunity was the survival business. They have the appetite for risk. The other interesting thing with them is the understanding of transnational opportunities. So because these people had been across so many borders, they understood what drove people that enabled them to work across borders. I spoke about the safari company. They were quite happy to operate through what was then Rhodesia, Zambia, later Zimbabwe, into South Africa. And they had no problems with crossing a border, and they had a much bigger vision than was typically the case in South Africa at the time. So for the 10-year partnerships, you should be able to, my proposal is that the establishment with local businesses, and what I found with the polls as well, the people who actually had local partners were the people who thrived. And this still remains the case today. The most successful businesses had, in some cases, a highly technically competent pole with a South African who would do business sourcing, or the other way around. And these partnerships seem to develop and give the best of both worlds. It also made integration into the local economy a lot easier. So in summary, the model says you can compress what takes somebody 30 years to develop into 10 years by starting with awareness, by looking at the legislation, by doing an NGO and business partnership, but also by encouraging local partnerships as a model to creating successful entrepreneurial. So I hope, yeah, as I said, it wasn't just about the Polish things. There was a lot of reference to their experience, but I hope it's been of interest to people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chunnett. Before I introduce my next speaker, our next presentation, please start gathering your questions. Those of you who are joining us via Zoom, you can start typing your questions in the chat, and my colleagues and I will gather those questions and present them to Dr. Chunnett. So now to our next presentation, Dr. Marta Nowakowska. So her presentation is titled Managing Cultural Heritage, an Introduction to the Identity of Krusovians or Borderlanders in interwar Poland. And again, as she delivers this presentation to us, please gather your questions or comments for her, and we'll then present them to her after the presentation.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? I can't hear because your mic is off. Okay, I hope you can hear me. So I would like to welcome everyone. I wish I will be, I am with you, not in Poland. It's, as you can see, it's quite cold here, not a winter yet, only in the mountain. And Wrocław is the warmest place in Poland. But it's raining and +4 degrees right now. It's already dark. So, but I'm sending you a warm regards. And I want to welcome all the official and unofficial guests. I hope there are people who remember me from the last conferences. I cannot see you, so I have no idea who is present. I know that Stefan is here, and I know that Tali is here because I saw you few or maybe an hour ago. And I'm sorry about my voice, as I'm tested COVID positive yesterday. But I'm trying to speak normally and as long as I can with my voice on. Stefan asked me all the time before my presentation and conference not to be too scientific, because as he keep reminding me that for people to understand, especially when I'm talking about so-called soft skills and abilities like identity, like tradition, so on, so on. So I thank you, Wanda, the previous speaker. It was very interesting, really. I would like to talk to you later on about the idea of migration and influence on business. But that's just a side thing. I'm here today to tell you something about identity. I know a few years back I was telling you about Polish identity, but right now I want to go back to the Kresovian identity and also about the cultural heritage, because the identity, the tradition, is a part of the cultural heritage. So I'll try, my technological skills are not very good. So I'm trying to share with you my presentation. I hope it's fine right now. All right. And I will start with the most important question we are all asking ourselves, even myself. Who am I? If you want to manage the cultural heritage, that's one of the most important questions, our identity. Because it's quite easy to think, okay, I am Polish because I was born in Poland. But then I can ask you, who are you? Are you South Africans? Are you Siberian Deportees generations? Are you Kresovians? Or are you Polish? Or maybe you are Polish South Africans or South African Poles. That's also a part of our project we are doing with Stefan and Kabus and all the other new members. And Kabus already told you about that. But that's the question I would like you all to ask yourself, not respond me right now, but later on February. But that's something I will tell you later on. Let me just do something like this. Okay, and I'm continuing with the presentation. Okay, a bit, maybe not a scientific thing, but something to remember and something to understand, that the cultural heritage, it's not only a material thing. Okay, heritage is something, it's like cultural legacy we received from the past. I mean, for our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, we live this legacy during our life in present days. And this legacy we will pass to the future generation. If there is a problem, especially with the migration, with the refugee issue, our said issue, the heritage disappeared, or the heritage is broken, or the heritage is stopped. And this is nothing we can redo in the future, because it's not only what we are building, but it's all social thinking behind and the personal beliefs and personal feeling behind. And what we have to remember, that the cultural heritage is not limited to the monuments, buildings, museums, collection objects. This is something it's easy to describe and easy to protect and easy to manage. But it's also kind of living expression inherited from our ancestors. It's something like oral tradition, food heritage, dance heritage, arts, manners, rituals, knowledge, practices, which knowledge and techniques are linked to the way we are living, and is that they are also linked to the helping us answering the question, who am I, right? What is important? The first protection acts about cultural heritage. It came from 1949 after the Second World War. Okay, then we have in 1972 the convention concerning the protection of the world culture and natural heritage. And it's something like a world cultural heritage. The other places who have exceptional universal values and belong to humans' common heritage. It's like pyramids in Egypt, Baroque cathedrals in Latin America, so on, so on, so on. But in 2003, we have a new convention which also add a non-material heritage. It is said that not only material buildings, monuments can be a heritage, but very important, maybe even more important, is to manage, to not to be forget the non-material ones. Okay, and the tradition, the heritage of the Kresovian people, it's something which disappeared slowly and slowly, but those people moved to the Western Poland, of course, but also around the world, and they're trying. Of course, they're trying, as Stefan can tell you all the time, to remain the traditions. But they are mixed with the locals one and with the globalization process, and they disappeared. I don't know if you know, there are Polish intangible cultural heritage lists. And I just give you the examples of the few intangible cultural heritage things from Poland. And I'm really wonder if you are aware of what is it. I'm sure Szopka of Kraków, there is something you will know, as well as Polish traditional dances. But rest, for me, very interesting. It's not all here. I just want to give an example. Very interesting is artistic and historical gunsmithing. The location is Cieszyn on the Śląskie Wody Voivodeship. And it is knowledge and skills related to the traditional crafts. And the date of the origin, it's about the second half of the 16th century. And it's still done in the Chechen, combining Polish and English names sometimes make me problems. This is so-called ptaszniczka, which is manufactured in Chechen, and this has the same way of doing and the same look as it was in 16th century. And the tradition is going through generation of the people from 16th century till 21st century. The same people whose parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on were doing this artistic gunsmithing, they are still working on it. There are no new people. There's nothing like, for example, I want to be a traditional gunsmithing because I have no tradition on it. There must be a tradition going through generation. Szopka of Kraków. You can see Szopka of Kraków on the down the right of my presentation. And this is in English, I think, Christmas cribs. It was invented in the middle 19th century. Szopkas were produced by carpenters and bricklayers from a Kraków area, mainly from Zwierzyniec. During Christmas, Szopkas were carried by door-to-door carolers. About carolers, kolędnicy will talk about a bit later. And these carolers who obtained the donations in return for a visit. From the second half of the 19th century, the bricklayers and construction workers of Kraków, who specialized in making szopkas, began to form of kind of a separate guild. And since 1937, a competition presenting such artifacts has taken place each December in the main square of Kraków till now. The Lykonik procession, the traditional Lykonik is on the up left part of the presentation, as you can see. This is a traditional one from the photo is from the 1927, but they wear the same traditional clothes each year during the Corpus Christi procession celebration, and this one, which is kept still, is from Łowicz. The date of the origins is 18th century. The procession of Lykonik, I would translate it to English as Zwierzyniec horse, and it's a custom which take place in the streets, usually in Kraków, every year, within octave of a Corpus Christi, giving the procession participant an impression of belonging to a community that has survived the passage of time and constitution, an important factor that forms collective and individual identity. And the members of the group are not the actors who act, but every person who has a knowledge about the detailed and the course of Lykonik procession. And they're just joining the procession. What else is interesting? I found interesting, of course, the Corpus Christi celebration. which the celebration is still on in each city or village in Poland during Corpus Christi. The art of making and playing bagpipes, which the tradition goes back to the 16th century. And the location is Zakopane, or the people who lives in Podhale. This is bagpipe is a wind instrument, knowing in Polish as koza. So not koza as a goat, but koza as a bagpipe. And the bagpipe music are the oldest element of the old Podhale culture, which stems directly from the Wallachian culture. So, but the nowadays bagpipe music, it's still played on the old traditional bagpipe, like going back to the Podhale residence. The name koza, I mean in Polish, a goat, in translation, came from the thing you put to your mouth, which looks like a goat. Falconry, still a living tradition. Date of origin is about 10th century. And it fits to the upper and eastern part of the Poland. There are still people who do falconry, and they still do the falcon hunting. The Polish national dance, I think you know them all. It's Polonaise, Mazur, Krakowiak, Kujawiak, and Oberek. So with the traditional, of course, dressing. What I found interesting, because I didn't know that the honey hunting, it's a Polish tradition. Honey hunting, honey hunters, you cannot find the date of origin. Location is Kurpie, Mazovia. It's like around the Warsaw and northeast part of Poland. So it's a tradition of beekeeping, which relies on a set of practice, knowledge, and tradition concerning honeybees and their habits. And in fact, we still can find the bees' houses, which are transported from the place to place to get the best and different variety honey in Poland. So when we are talking about cultural heritage, we have to remember that the tradition is one of them. And going straight to the Kresowian culture, in fact, we can say this is a Polish culture, but also you cannot say there's a Polish culture without Kresowian one. For me, it's very interesting because when I was going through all the letters and traditions of the Kresy, I found out how many traditions we still use, but also how many they were changed, adapting to the modern culture. And of course, all the stories behind and beliefs behind already forgotten. And Kresowian culture in a modern Poland is some kind of myth. It is a myth about diversity, the myth of multicultural area without autonomy, without own political and military power, the place where the different people live in peace. The name Kresy, literally the word simply means frontier or a borderland. And this name Kresy is given to the territories which several hundred years ago belonged to the Polish state. And now they mostly belong to Ukraine. So the question I'm asking usually, so why the people who went from Kresy, migrate or being deported from Kresy, they are connected to the modern Poland, not to the modern Ukraine. What is interesting, the Kresy was inhabited mainly by a Polish and not Polish people. Most of them have Ukrainian origin. There were also Gypsies, Jewish people, and Armenian diasporas, as well as minorities of the nation bordering the area, Hungarians, Romanians, and Slovak. So it was quite a multicultural area where people, as we can say in all our nowadays myth, live in peace. According to the tradition, it is used to refer to the Polish eastern territories from the interwar period. They are Kresy. There is, however, another meaning of the word Kresy, which is quite recent, more universal and metaphorical. So Kresy are a separate, somehow mysterious and no fully known area where people of completely different culture can coexist in harmony. So that various interesting things happened that they could not happen somewhere else. It's called tradition of Kresy, the art of coexistence with the strangers, the others, handed down from generation to generation, tolerating each others without isolation, accepting the others, but without assimilation, seeing the positive values of meeting other people, other nations, other cultures, while preserving the identity of both sides. Which, if you think about it, that's a very positive way of thinking, especially in the 20th and 21st century. The Kresy are the symbols which you can still find in the eastern part of Polish towns. This is a symbol when it is said that cities has a church, an Orthodox church, and a synagogue standing next to the market square, and it shows diversity but unity in one. There are still towns like this existing in eastern Poland, and for example, town like this is Szczebrzeszyn. And another symbol of Kresy is a celebration of Christmas in the areas of a Catholic and Orthodox population. So inhabitants of these areas like to say that the Christmas lasts at least for 2 weeks. First, the Catholic holiday was celebrated, and then the Orthodox one. And there are still villages in the eastern part of Poland, but only villages, that they still have a 2 weeks Christmas. And how important is the Kresy traditions to the modern Poland? We have to remember that the Polish culture and consciousness belong to Kresy. It's just enough to mention that the people who were born in Kresy So it's Ray, it's Mickiewicz, up on the presentation. It's Słowacki, Krasicki, Fredro. It's Miłosz and Lem. That's Moniuszko and Karłowicz. That's also Kościuszko. It's also Rejten, Dybowski, Śniadecki brothers, Niemen. So all the people who play the role of creating the Polish identity came from Kresy. So you can't separate Kresy from Poland. I would even say that Kresy is more Polish than nowadays Poland. So, and why is it important right now? Because according to the statistics from 2021, 1 in 7 Poles currently living in Polish territory admits to being a Kresy origin. Myself, I had a Kresy origin. Of course, that's why it's so interesting for me. I have it from my mom's side, but my grandfather was a Ukrainian Kresy citizen. My father's wife, her grandparents came directly from Lvov. I still have a piano, which they took from after Second World War during resettle the people. But despite the relatively high percentage of Poles with the Kresy origin and numbers of organizations dealing with the Kresy, the memory of the Kresy culture is slowly dying. We're still having a myth of Kresy, a wonderful and lost land in a collective memory, but mainly through literature. The true and tragic history of Kresy has been too much forgotten. That's because the generation of the people who remember Kresy is passing away right now. And sometimes we have a problem also to understand that they were usually kids when they were deported or moved without their family. So they cannot remember everything, every tradition they had. And they adapted to the new community, to the new society. So they took the new traditions and trying to fill in traditions they still remembered. Okay, and I would like to concentrate on one example, just because for me it's very interesting to see how many Kresy tradition came to the Polish tradition and also what is still remembered. The most important tradition of the Kresy people was Wigilia, Christmas Eve. It becomes kind of the national symbol. And I will just describe you a traditional Kresovian Wigilia, and then you can think, what do you know? What do you have no idea about? And what maybe is interesting to adapt, and maybe that's something you need to the story behind the Wigilia to understand this special holiday more and more deeply. Of course, Wigilia was a day without meat and alcohol, but that's I think we all know, because in Poland we can have alcohol for Wigilia, I think since 2010, something around. But first of all, something you need to remember is a lunch before Christmas dinner. I didn't know there was a special recipes for a Christmas Eve dinner. So then you have a fish soup, then you have a dumplings, pierogi with mushrooms, a whole crayfish, apple strudel, or a special sago soup with milk. Then you have a crispy cakes, pate, fish with mayonnaise, vegetables, pike with a white sauce, and so-called chreczuszki. It's kind of cake, a little cake with a jam. Vigilia always starts with a first star. This is something I still remember. It was celebrating when I was a kid. So you cannot start Vigilia dishes and sitting to the table before the first star. When you can see the first star on the sky, then is the time to start Vigilia, which is, if you think, quite early, as the sun sets late December about 3:30 or even 2:30 when you think about eastern border. You have to have 12 dishes for each month of the year, and you have to eat 12 dishes, because if you miss some, then you will have a month or two of disgrace and being unhappy. So that's, for me, it's something also I do remember, and we are still celebrating now, which is very, very sometimes hard to eat all the stuff. You have to put a hay under the tablecloth, because that's bring memory of this table. You start with the almond soup with rice. It was very important. And then you got another soups you can add, which was a lemon soup with a pike, barsh. I think you all know barsh, fish soup, or a mushroom soup. It depends on if it was in the eastern part of Croatia or more northern part of Croatia. With the table, you have to have 2 empty places for people. It's interesting for me because I just know the idea of 1 empty place. And of course, 1 empty place was free for the person who might show up that evening. And this person could not be refused with the meal. But the other empty seat is for one who we loved and had passed away forever. And also the people, the family who were attending the dinner, they must put a portion of each dish they ate to this plate from the people who passed away. After the almond soup, the oldest person in the family took a wafer, or alone, or in Lviv region with the honey, and sharing with the rest of the family. Interesting dish I found also was a herring in the Kiev style. You've got a recipe here. I have to admit I never had a herring for a Christmas Eve, but that's also tradition for the Kresovian Vigilia. And also another very traditional dish is kutia, which is cooked wheat with the poppy seeds, honey and nuts, almonds and orange peel. And there is a tradition Okay, kutia I know, but luckily we stopped this tradition, that the eldest participant would scoop the kutia into the spoon, go out to the corridor and throw the kutia against the ceiling. If the kutia stuck on the ceiling, it brings good luck for the house for the next year. There are also some kind of traditions, which I mentioned before, the kolędowania, this carol singing. And what is quite a funny thing, because you all know Halloween and tricks, but when the kids going around and they want to have sweets for going around. So that's something similar, that the carol singers would go from house to house dressed with the various characters. But that's various characters ranging from the Holy Family, angels, shepherds, kings, and the devil and death with a Grim Reaper, which is quite interesting, I think. And I do remember when I was a kid, there was a tradition, but I haven't heard about it for years. There's also a belief that during Christmas Eve, just before midnight, the animals start speaking. Yes?
Yes, I'm just, thank you for the really fascinating. I'm just going to ask you to please wrap it up, because we also want to have time for questions and a discussion with our audience. So please, can, as soon as possible, please, can you wrap it up?
Sure. Okay, the last thing is the animal speaking human voice, which is believed that just before midnight they're starting it. And then during the midnight is pasterka, so the midnight mass. There's still a tradition of pasterka, still in Poland. Okay, so that's all what I told you before. It's about the tradition, something to help you to answer the question, who am I? What is my personal identity? Who I'm identity with? And then it goes to the group identity. So it's not only about who am I in person, but also to which group I belong. And that's the idea of the manual Kobus and Stefan speak at the beginning. So the idea is to print and do the workshops about the Polish or Kresovian identity, about our knowledge and what we are passing to the next generation to preserve the heritage. And it will be based, of course, on the literature, but also on the interviews I would like to have, because as Kobus and Stefan mentioned, I'm coming on February, and I would like to try a special workshop about our identity, about South African Poles, or maybe the Polish South African, which I think, like I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we must preserve, because if we don't do it, there will be something which will be forgotten forever. We will forget forever. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did I make it short enough?
Thank you, Marta, for that fascinating presentation. And then, so now we're going to have a technical situation. So Marta, I'm going to ask you to please keep yourself on mute while I'm speaking, and while this microphone is on. And then when it's your turn to speak, then you can unmute, and then I'll mute this computer. Very briefly, very briefly, in 5 minutes, just, are there any questions or any comments for, so there is,
for sure, but in South Africa, the race differences. Poles were white, one was black, Chinese. What does play in integration and making? So I think you need to repeat and then you will.
So the question was race, the question of race. So Poles in South Africa were white, Rwandans in South Africa were black, and Chinese were Chinese. What role did race play into them being able to establish and develop themselves?
Very interestingly, far less than I thought it would. Far less than I thought it would. The Chinese obviously suffered from the brunt of an apartheid system. They were not legal, okay, and many they actually couldn't exist. So that forced them very much into a gray area. It did not stop them forming good partnership bonds with white partners. So there was very much of a not parasitic, a symbiotic relationship that developed with white partners, the Chinese group. The Rwandans, interestingly, aren't black, and they are not regarded as black. So they are as foreign in South Africa. So their skin color might be black, but because of the legislation in South Africa, they do not enjoy the privilege of being black in South Africa. So they effectively they suffer the brunt of BEE, they suffer all of those things and this forces them to partner with local white businesses as well. The Poles were not obviously, no, they were white, that was true, but they were Catholic generally in a very staunch Afrikaans dominated Calvinistic society. And there was also a lot of discrimination at the time because of that. Okay. So in a way, they all had discrimination of a sort, and the characteristic shone through, irrespective of what the color of the skin was. Thank you.
Any last comments, questions? Yes, you may come up, yes.
If I may make some concluding remarks, I just want to highlight what Marta's last slide was, and that is she was talking about the development of a manual or a strategy. And okay, there wasn't enough time, but the plan is, and this is part of one of the projects that will be undertaken in the following year, is to now develop a strategy, or as Marta calls it, a manual, to be able to develop possibly a Kosovian type identity that we hope to present at next year's conference. The primary objective of that manual is to encourage the next generation of Siberian Deportees to become acutely aware of their history and heritage in South Africa, so that hopefully, as current second generations, we can then pass on our legacy onto them, so they can pick up the baton and run with it. So that's the objective of our project in the next year. And hopefully we'll present, okay, in fact, we plan to present it at next year's 10th anniversary, 10th Heritage Conference, as part of the overall 80th anniversary celebrations. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Cobus. Thank you, Wanda.
Thank you, Marta, for your presentations. Thank you to the Embassy of Poland. Thank you to the Embassy of Ukraine. Thank you to all the partners who made this possible. Thank you to the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. Thank you for our physical audience that is here joining us. Thank you very much for taking the time out of this very cold Sunday to be here. Thank you to our audience that is joining us virtually for joining us next year. So we look forward to next year for another hopefully successful collaboration conference. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. And also for those of us who are joining us here physically, there are refreshments outside. So please go and help yourselves and also take the time to view the exhibition. Thank you.